Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome in. This is FST, Fantasy Sports Today. My name's Matt Striker. His name is Joe Pisapia, the one and only. And yep, this is the spot. If you want to dominate season long, DFS, straight up wagering, whatever it is, we've got you covered for the upcoming Major League Baseball season. I love the fact that Joe and I are here because, Joe, you've written the book, literally. Author of the Black Book series. You can go check it out as soon as you get a chance because it's changed the way we look at players. It's changed the way we look at information. And speaking of information, we're going to give you a lot here. So quick reminder, at SportsGrid, at SportsGrid TV, those are our social media handles. In addition to our app, give it a search because all of this information will live there and you can grab it. But just don't wait too long because there are others that are going to grab it as well because everybody wants the information. So, Joe, I feel and hear them pounding at the cages, so I'm going to set you loose, my friend. Hello.
Speaking of being set loose, can we talk about Matt Striker's new background? I mean, I just bursted through the walls with baseball knowledge, with baseball excitement. I want you to snap into a Slim Jim. That's really what I want you to do with that background. Let's go back to the Matt Striker background. Because I want to celebrate this because we're a celebration of baseball, among other things. But here's Matt Striker. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's so good. The excitement is palpable, folks, especially when it comes to those of us who have keeper shares of Ronald Acuna. Raise your hand if you do. I do. But good news. When we left you last week, things were a little concerning. We told you take a breath. Don't worry about it. And Acuna is in the clear. Everything's all right. He is working towards stuff. It was precautionary. That's a good thing. So the MRI was clean on the knee, so we can move forward now. And hopefully all is well with Ronald Acuna for the next 162 games that actually matter. Remember, it's only spring training, and it's only the 10th of March, but that's where we start with today's headline. So good news for the Braves, good news for my shares of Ronald Acuna repeating MVP, and, of course, any of our Dynasty Keeper shares of Ronald Acuna, not to mention any early drafts that you had or best ball drafts, too. The Nationals made a signing. Outfielder Eddie Rosario is going to end up with the Nats in 2024, so that's a good bat to add to the middle of this lineup and potentially end up flipping to another contender at some point in time in the season. That's what a lot of these teams like the Pirates and the Washington Nationals have done the last few years pretty successfully, where they're taking these veteran players, giving them playing time, giving them at-bats while they wait and curate some of the younger talent, and then flip them for pieces as the season goes on, which is a very smart thing to do for the clubs that are in rebuilds. Also, big news, probably the biggest news that broke over the weekend, Friday bombshell, Noelvi Marte suspended 80 games. So the Cincinnati Reds young third base prospect who we were all very excited about. We've done more than one segment about Noelvi Marte on this show in the last month. He will be missing 80 games for a PED suspension, so there's a lot to break down from that. We're going to get to that in a second. But from a fantasy perspective, maybe no bigger news than Mookie Betts. Looks like he might be playing shortstop for the Dodgers. Mookie Betts is indeed probably the best athlete, arguably, in Major League Baseball, and he just proves again and again that he can pretty much do anything, Matt. So here we go. Mookie Betts taking ground balls, getting some time at shortstop, giving the Dodgers even more flexibility to get those big bats into the outfield. That means probably from a Gavin Lux standpoint, things are not looking good if you held on to Gavin Lux, because it seems like that experiment might be coming to an end. But first of all, from a fantasy perspective, this is a player that already qualifies in the outfield in second base. If he qualifies at shortstop too, Matt, it's hard to argue that he is not the second player easily off the board with all of that eligibility. What do you think about Betts potentially playing shortstop and being eligible there for fantasy managers in 2024?
It's a great thing to think about as a lot of drafts are coming up imminently, seemingly so, because it definitely throws a wrench in the market. It changes how you want to draft. Now, look, if you were targeting Mookie Betts, you didn't care if he was the first bowler in your local league or a surfer or whatever it was that he does. Everything he does really, really well. So yes, the eligibility, depending on when your platform offers it, that's the big thing too, right? It has to be, doesn't matter the spring training games. So we have to look at how they're going to put him, and I would be interested to see you grab him regardless. If you want him, you take him. You mentioned the Lux project moving on, but we live in a time now where we hear, hey, this name is out. Our first thought is, well, who's in? Miguel Rojas. We started talking about him, and then it kind of went down. Start to talk about him again as well, and start to explore some of the openings that the Marte suspension will create. You have to think that the Reds are really happy that they held on to guys like Jonathan India.
Yeah, well, India is certainly one of those pieces. Now, the Reds are not going to be able to trade in spring training, you would think. Now, I mean, I guess they could because they still have enough depth to get through, but I think that puts the kibosh on any India trades probably for the first month or two of the season, you would think. India is probably still the odd man out in this mix, but it is a very deep pool because you have a guy like Spencer Steer who can play all over the field, right? Probably slated to play left field to start the year. Matt McClain is taking over at second base. Ellie De La Cruz playing shortstop. So you can have Heimer Candelario came over this offseason. He's going to be playing third. You have Kristen Encarnacion Strand going to first base. So you can have Fraley DH. You can have India DH. And I think they'll probably keep India around for a while in that DH-ish sort of role would be my guess. And we all know, there's still plenty of time. Unfortunately, injuries do continue to happen. So you can never have enough depth in Major League Baseball when it comes to the rotation or to the starting lineup. The Reds have that. They have youth. But again, it does sort of prohibit them now from making that move from India. I think they're going to wait because the pieces that I'm talking about, Matt McClain was great last year. Ellie De La Cruz, certainly fun to watch, certainly has a lot of upside. There's a lot of youth here when Christian Encarnacion Strand as well because you've got a lot of guys that are still relatively unproven to a large degree. And that's going to be interesting to see here for the Reds because now you've taken another piece out of the mix. And Marte, certainly, I think it's a dynasty buy low situation for Marte. I would not worry too much about this. We've seen guys get popped for this before in recent memory and still come back and have good seasons. But from the Reds' perspective, do you think that now they hold on to Jonathan India well into, let's say, June or even July towards a break, maybe?
Well, that would have to depend on how well they are doing, and I do anticipate this team to do well. And I like that you mentioned where everyone will fall into place because it really bumps up Christian Encarnacion Strand's value, I believe, because of the confidence in the at-bats. People are always going to chase power. Speed is now a thing that people are taking for granted, and that's fine until you realize in your ninth round or so that you really don't have much, and then you start to go scramble, and then you have to sacrifice because the peripherals are never going to be the same. So when you look at how people are going to value power, and I bring it back full circle to if Mookie Betts now becomes closer to a 1-2, 1-3 because of the eligibility, you have to think about what you're valuing going into your league's particular draft. And the one thing I'll always do before every single draft, Joe, is I look at those league settings. I don't have to assume I know. I want to make sure I know what's valued so I can draft accordingly. This is going to be a great show because there are a lot of moving parts and we have a lot of answers.
There is. We're going to do some previews of the East American and National in this show. We're going to talk about some value plays in hour 2. But in hour 1, we're going to start things off here with some guys that might be a little risky at their ADP in fantasy drafts. I know a lot of people are drafting this weekend and in the subsequent weekends to come. So we're going to help you get prepared for all your fantasy baseball drafts, for all your fantasy investments, not to mention all your wagering as well. So sit back, relax, get that second cup of coffee because FST is taking off. When we return, we're going to talk about some risky business when it comes to the fantasy landscape of ADP. We'll be right back with more on SportsGrid right after this.
I think Boston's going to the NBA Finals, and at this point, I'm still willing to say this early that they're the best team in the NBA, even better, in my view, than the Nuggets.
Barkley, for me, I say the front runners would be the Dallas Cowboys and or the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think Jerry might get in on this and say just make it happen and get Saquon on our football team.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Women's basketball, as a coach, as a basketball purist, is so much better to watch than the men. You don't believe me? Sit down, watch it for yourself. Think about the fact that the athleticism is different. So now you have to depend on your fundamental and your skill and not your athleticism.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
The books are treating the Celtics 4 points better at minimum than maybe every single team in the NBA. And so far, I believe they've covered every game since the break.
The Celtics' strict goal here, anything less than a finals appearance and a finals championship is going to be a failure for the Celtics. They got all the pressure in the world across the board here.
Game time decisions only on SportsGrid. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid, your 24/7 sports wagering network. The early line.
Magical and historic season in Lincoln, Nebraska continues.
He is the best player in the NBA, but also in the biggest moments where the national media is watching.
Newswire.
Something that we have never seen happen before with one of the iconic coaches in the game.
Pharrell coast to coast.
The team covers. It's automatic. It's every time. Not sometimes. It's every time.
Game time decisions.
Luka is actually far more dangerous from 3 on the road this year than at home.
This game here tonight, you may want to consider taking as many points as humanly possible.
In-game live. Prime time.
We got not 1, but 2 coaches fired systems in place.
Sports Rage
This
Late
sort of
Night.
has letdown written all over it. It's going to be hard to match the emotion that they played with the other night.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
You guts it.
Great.
Hey, what's up, everybody, and welcome in. This is FST Fantasy Sports Today. My name is Matt, his name is Joe, and it is now time for Risky Business. Now, I'll make several references to a far long forgotten movie that perhaps Joe and only a few of a certain age will get. But Joe, I know you are wearing pants because this risky business idea is about what you're going to do. Sometimes you just have to say, what am I going to do, right? And now there are certain players that drop in your lap in unique spots in our drafts. Hey, this guy could steal 30 bases. You know what? This guy might hit 290. What do I do? What do I do? It is indeed risky business. So with that said, take it away.
Yes, pants are not optional around these parts. I can tell you that's a misnomer. Just because you see from here up, that don't look too much into that. But yes, you know, sometimes it's not just about these players and how good they could potentially be. It's the price we have to pay for them. And I think that's something we always have to ask ourselves when we're looking into our drafts. And remember, ADP is polling. ADP is a consensus of value. It doesn't mean it's true necessarily. It doesn't mean they're going to return this value. It's just where most people collectively think this player should go. And I think people get too wrapped up in that sometimes. And I want to start with Nico Horner, who had a breakout season last year, who was a really tremendous value last year, a player that I loved taking last year at the ADP was going. But now that ADP has risen significantly after that breakout season, he's hitting at the top of the order for a Cubs team that I think has potential to win that division. Matt and I were talking over the break there. I think the Cubs have a really good shot to win the National League Central this year, especially bringing Cody Bellinger back, especially if Imanaga ends up being as good as we think he might be able to be. But Nico Horner last year doubled his stolen bases year over year from 20 all the way up to 42. He hit 280. Tremendous. He carried that batting average with him. He scored almost 100 runs last year. But the problem is he's going in ADP in the mid to high 50s. Now, my problem with that is when you look at the rest of the landscape of shortstop, you can do better. If you're in those roto category leagues too, where you're just playing season-long roto, the trouble with Nico Horner is he's really a 3-category guy. He's going to give you batting average, he's going to give you runs scored, and he's going to give you stolen bases. Now, is he going to give you power? No. Is he going to be RBI? No, because he's at the top of that order. So without the double-digit homers even, with just the 68 RBI, and remember, he had 688 plate appearances last year. You want to talk about volume being king? Volume is king when it comes to Nico Horner. If he should struggle at all, if he gets dropped in the order at any time, if he gets injured at any time, all of a sudden, Nico Horner's value becomes very suspect. And Matt, if you look at some of the other guys you could take later on, at 93, almost 4 rounds later, you could take Xander Bogaerts, who is a 2020 guy with a 280 batting average. This makes no sense to me of why Nico Horner is going 40-something picks ahead of Xander Bogaerts. So for me, I'm out on Nico Horner, not because I don't like the player. I just don't think the ADP makes sense for a 3-category guy after a breakout season. I just think it's a little too high of a price to pay, despite the fact I'm bullish on the Cubs. Your thoughts on Nico Horner and his value coming into 2024?
Well, it's a great spot by you and whomever else were in part to draw this up, because Nico Horner is a perfect example of market overcorrection. And when you take a look at what Nico Horner offers, Joe was very smart to show you the categories that Nico Horner is going to provide for you. You need to take a look at those 3 categories and then see where else can I get those categories? How can I build those categories? Because what I do believe is truly inflating the ADP of a guy like Nico Horner is the unique category of batting average. We are now in a time where you say a guy's going to hit 280, 290. Man, he's got great discipline. Wow, he's awesome. And yeah, but Joe, I remember a time where 320, 330 guys existed, right? For careers. We watched those guys over for their career. How about with 2 strikes on them? So Nico Horner possesses this newfangled thing that's new to a new generation of analysts, and it offers a very unique element. So people will say, I'll reach for that because it's so unique. Why not reach for Jung-Ho Lee, who's going to profile batting average the same? Jeff McNeil will profile batting average the same. We'll talk more about McNeil and an injury that could compromise that. But if you're chasing batting average, you're going to take in the top 50 picks. There's far, far better places I think you could go. 30 stolen bases also isn't something you could chase. But I do like it from the leadoff position. I would just add Horner much later on for depth and for fluff more so than anything else. Who's next?
Who's next is Josh Young. And by the way, I totally agree. I think it's an overcorrection from last year, him being undervalued. I think you nailed that. And stolen bases are easier to find now in 2024, Absolutely. Right? Since the new rules. So we're chasing batting average of 280. We're chasing 40 steals. I can find the stolen bases a little later on too, or more of them collectively. Josh Young, a player we were very high on last year, maybe another overcorrection. A player who started out red hot last year for the Texas Rangers, was in that conversation for Rookie of the Year for quite some time. And then things did drop off after an injury in the second half. So I think we need to talk about this because he's being drafted currently around 122. A good season when you look out on a paper, right? 75 runs, 70 RBI, 23 homers, hit 266. Now, he did have some good performances in the postseason. I think that's what people remember. But I'm also not forgetting that in the second half last year, he hit 229 with a 638 OPS. It seemed like the league really did make adjustments to Josh Young. Now, I understand we could talk about the injuries and missing some time and what that meant to that 34-game stretch in the second half, but that's a pretty good sample there where I think there should at least be some concern when it comes to Josh Young. And I don't think there's enough being built into that ADP because, once again, there's plenty of pivots you can make at the position. So Josh Young at ADP of 122, you could wait for a guy like Isaac Paredes. You can look for a guy with power like Jake Berger or Nolan Gorman if you're looking for that sort of guy. Or, an old crafty veteran like Justin Turner, who we keep trying to write off every single year. And guess what? Last year, all he did was drive in 96 runs and hit 23 bombs and 276 batting average. So like you can't, you can't stop that guy. And I'm just wondering, in redraft leagues, is Josh Young worth this premium? Do you think he is?
Well, the Josh Young defender truther will come back to you, will return serve with, hey, that was a thumb injury last season, and those are really, really monumental for hitters to overcome, especially young hitters. No one's talking about the fact if you're monitoring him in the spring, he hasn't even started running yet. He's got a calf injury. So now you're going to say to me, okay, Joe, you make a great point. Someone returns serve, and you're going to say, well, thumb, well, calf. Well, you give me one more of those wells, and I'm going somewhere else. And I like that you always give us options. You give us names that are going around. So, I don't know. I'm off it because of the uncertainty and the volatility. This is fantasy baseball. This is fantasy sports. There's a plethora of talent. I can go somewhere else. What's next?
Yeah, and Josh Young has had a lot of injuries in his young career as well. See what I did? I made the dad joke. All right, let's get to some pitching here. Kodai Senga is still hanging around the ADP around 100. And Kodai Senga was brilliant last year. A huge strikeout total of well over 200. The linchpin of the Mets rotation. He did walk 77 guys, so the walk rate was a little higher than we wanted. But still, he was tremendous. 112 games at a 1.22 whip and a 2.98 ERA. But even though the ADP has fallen because of this shoulder issue, I don't think it's fallen enough. We don't know yet if Kodai Senga is going to pitch in May or in June. We still don't have enough information. And sorry, color me, pessimistic. As a Mets fan, these things typically don't work out for us. So I'm just saying, I'm looking at the ADP, Matt, and I'm seeing him being drafted ahead of guys like Michael King, like Bailey Ober, even guys like Hunter Brown, and I don't get it. I would rather take all those guys right now as opposed to the uncertainty of Kodai Senga. And one more guy to throw into this mix too is a relief pitcher too, who's got a great track record and has been a closer for many, many years that we have looked to in fantasy. But Kenley Jansen is another guy too, dealing with an injury going into this spring. He's just picking up the ball now. If you look at last year's work for Kenley Jansen, a 3.63 ERA, you saw the strikeout rate start to decline with Kenley Jansen. You saw maybe the age and the innings starting to catch up with him a little bit. It could be a dicey situation for him potentially. So I think you have to look at Kenley Jansen and ask yourself this question. Is he going to be one of these guys that falls off and loses this closer job? Because I think the answer might be yes. Now, when we come back, we're going to start our preview series beginning with the National League East, what it looks like for fantasy on FST.
I think Boston's going to the NBA Finals, and at this point, I'm still willing to say this early that they're the best team in the NBA, even better, in my view, than the Nuggets.
Barkley, for me, I say the front runners would be the Dallas Cowboys and or the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think Jerry might get in on this and say just make it happen and get Saquon on our football team.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Women's basketball, as a coach, as a basketball purist, is so much better to watch than the men. You don't believe me? Sit down, watch it for yourself. Think about the fact that the athleticism is different. So now you have to depend on your fundamental and your skill and not your athleticism.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
The Brooks are treating the Celtics 4 points better at minimum than maybe every single team in the NBA. And so far, I believe they've covered every game since the break.
The Celtics' strict goal here, anything less than a finals appearance and a finals championship is going to be a failure for the Celtics. They got all the pressure in the world across the board here.
Game time decisions, only on SportsGrid. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid, your 24/7 sports wagering network. The early line.
Magical and historic season in Lincoln, Nebraska continues.
He is the best player in the NBA, but also in the biggest moments where the national media is watching.
Newswire.
Something that we have never seen happen before with one of the iconic coaches in the game.
Pharrell Coast to Coast.
The team covers. It's automatic. It's every time. Not sometimes. It's every time.
Game time decisions.
Luka is actually far more dangerous from 3 on the road this year than at home.
This game here tonight, you may want to consider taking as many points as humanly possible.
In-game live, prime time.
We got not one, but 2 coaches fired systems in place.
Sports Rage
This
Late
sort of
Night.
has letdown written all over it. It's going to be hard to match the emotion that they played with the other night.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Great.
All right, let's do it. What's up, everybody? Welcome back in FST Fantasy Sports Today. Matt and Joe with you here, and now it's time to roll up our sleeves and give you what you came for. Joe, let's dive in, start to do some previews. Let's do it division by division. Let's get through it. There's going to be a lot of information here, folks. Let's go. We're going to start with the Atlanta Braves. And this is a team that just won every single game. They were a bettor's delight if you knew how to wager upon them. Their lineup is strong. Everyone on this team, Joe, I think can hit 20 home runs. You look at Michael Harris II as a poor man's Acuna, even though I don't like that term, but you miss out on Acuna, bam, grab Michael Harris if you can. And from the pitching depth, a guy like A.J. Smith-Shawver, who isn't even on our radar, is a guy that could slide in. So I think the Braves are going to be just as good, if not better, than last season. Your thoughts?
Yeah, the Braves lineup is loaded. I mean, this was the best offense in baseball last year, and they look like they're going to be again this year. If Michael Harris is sitting at the bottom of the order, it tells you just how good they are potentially. But I think the big surprise here is Marcell Ozuna, too, last year with the power season that he had. It was a tremendous year for him. You look at what Olsen was able to do, 50-plus homers. I don't know where the easy out is in this lineup. Jared Kelenic will be the interesting one, too. That's the guy to keep an eye on and circle to see, can the Atlanta Braves get him to turn around, Matt? I think that's a big question mark for sure. Matt, what are your thoughts on this rotation, though? Chris Sale there, do you think they could turn things around for Sale in this rotation?
Yes. Chris Sale has a great quote. He said, if he goes out and stinks it up as a 3, no one's going to care. And he's going out there pitching with that I don't care kind of mentality. And on a team like the Braves, this is okay to do. He doesn't have to shoulder the weight that was on him in Boston for so long. So now let's pivot and keep it moving. I'm sure the conversation will keep going. Reminder, at SportsGrid TV, we'll continue to have the conversation because it's a fluid situation. Let's move to another team that a lot of wagerers really like in this division, and that would be the Philadelphia Phillies. The bullpen took the next step last season. I think Alvarado takes the next step this season again as a closer. If not, Sir Anthony Dominguez is there. Soto is there from Detroit. And then there's even Orion Kirkering, a great name. Whit Merrifield is a bolstered addition to the offense. Do you think the Phillies can challenge? I don't think they challenge the Braves to take the division, but can they challenge for the postseason?
I think they can challenge for both, to tell you the truth. You know, you look at that Atlanta Braves rotation. You know, if anything happens to Spencer Strider or Max Fried at the top, things get a little dicey there potentially. Charlie Morton looked like a guy who was over the hill last year. You don't know what you're going to get out of Chris Sale. So there's a lot of questions with the Braves rotation. With the Phillies rotation, I think a little bit of a different feel. You have stability there. You have Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler at the top, and you have these guys that eat innings and give you quality starts and are striking out guys at an alarming rate. So it's the back of this rotation I think you're concerned with. Suarez, Walker, and Sanchez. What do you get out of those guys? We'll see. Pitching can always be acquired too, but the lineup, again, it's a solid one, start to finish. We're waiting for Kyle Schwarber at some point, you know, to not be able to thread the needle the way he does. It's unbelievable every year.
That'll
a guy who strikes out that much.
It was such an anomaly, you know, like that'll have to change.
It is,
but
it's an anomaly every single year where he ends up.
Yeah.
I know. It's just crazy to think about, though, that a guy can be that productive in the power department and thread the needle every single year. Trey Turner, you imagine a bit of a bounce back season potentially for him.
Yes.
Real Muto, I'm concerned with the age of him at catcher. Again, you start to see a little bit of decline in the batting average the last couple of years. Some other numbers starting to decline a little bit. Is this the year we see a steeper decline? It's possible. Castellanos is the guy. We're going to talk more about him in the second hour of the show, too, that I really have my eye on in fantasy. He's coming at a nice value. But Stott is another good pivot point. The Phillies are going to be there once again. The question is, will the Phillies have another slow start to the year? Because that seems to be their MO every single season out of the gate.
Yep. And by the way, sneaky speed at the bottom of the order will be Yohan Rojas. That's a guy that can definitely swipe some bags. Probably be a free square in most of your drafts if you have any coming up tonight. Good luck. Okay, speaking of good luck, Joe, I'm glad we've breezed through because good luck, New York Mets fans. I don't know what to tell you. I've watched this organization break so many hearts of friends and family over my time. I grew up in Queens in the shadow of Shea Stadium, what it was called back then, kids. This is going to be an interesting team. 1 or 2 injuries and something's up. I think this pitching staff is going to be better than people imagine. I think the bullpen will be a welcome sight again for sore eyes. Harrison Bader's going to be sneaky. G-Man Choi joins this team that's developing a new face. And I understand what Steve Cohen is doing with Kodai Senga and Fujinami and Ji-Man Choi, considering the fan base around the stadium. But is that going to be enough to win?
Well, if you look at the Mets lineup, the lineup itself is kind of intriguing, especially from a fantasy standpoint. Brendan Nimmo coming off his best season. Now he might hit leadoff. You could see Marte potentially flip back there to the one spot. Lindor coming off a fantastic year where I think he was being underrated last year. Alonso, some trade rumors. Will they re-sign him to a long-term contract? We'll see. If they move on from Alonso, this lineup becomes obliterated at some point in the second half of the year. And of course, you don't have the guys like Ronnie Mauricio who are starting to, really pique everybody's interest. He's out for the year with an ACL injury from the Arizona Fall League. So there's injury number one, and then Kodai Senga injury number two. So right off the bat, Matt, there you go, 1 or 2 injuries. We already have it, and the season hasn't even started yet, folks. So the rotation is a complete mess, though. But before we get to that, Francisco Alvarez, from a fantasy standpoint, there's a better version of Alvarez who doesn't just hit for power, who also hits for a higher batting average that we have not seen yet on the big league level. So understand that Alvarez could be a breakout fantasy star and a star in Major League Baseball sooner than later. He's a terrific young player. Vientos, Beatty, they've got a lot to prove here in this lineup. The rotation, when you take Kodai Senga out of it, it's a disaster. I know Sean Manaea looked good in spring training yesterday. Can we hang our hat on that? Probably not. Luis Severino hasn't been good in years. Quintana had a injury last year, missed most of the season. He was fine when he came back. But Tyler McGill is interesting because that's a player that's still young enough to make progress, but this is not a major league rotation. This is the kind of rotation it looks like an expansion team would put together. MLB is talking about expanding. That's what an expansion rotation looks like, folks. Take a good look at it.
This is the San Antonio rotation? Is that what this is?
There you go. It's the Nashville notes right there. There you go.
Hang on, man. That's great, folks. Hey, you better mail that to yourself. Do the poor man's patent. But here's the thing, all right? with the Mets, I understand JD Martinez is out there. And if the Mets don't want to do that, if the Mets have big plans for, say, Juan Soto in 2025, things like that, then this next team could certainly add a JD Martinez if it fit. And we're talking about the Marlins now. They have 3 guys on this team that can hit 300 or lead off in Arise, Chisholm, and Anderson, even though Anderson is on the decline. A lot of pitching, but some of that's going to need to satisfy the bullpen. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the Marlins because they have a boatload of pitching. And they have some good hitting. I just think they lack Berger. A full season of Berger could be what they're missing, but I think they lack just that pop to compete with the Phillies and the Braves and so on.
They do. From a fantasy perspective, also, Tim Anderson, if he makes a rebound, that's great, but I would not be holding my breath for that. Jake Berger was a tremendous pickup, I think, for them. Chisholm is that X factor. If Jazz Chisholm gives us a full season, he could be a very valuable fantasy player, and he's being drafted as such where you're getting a value on that, but there is risk inherently. The bottom of this order is a little suspect, but missing Jorge Soler from this lineup, I think, is a huge miss. Like, I think that's something where that middle of that order is not solid yet, besides Berger. But really, it all comes down to how many games you get out of Jazz Chisholm. If you get 80 or if you're getting 150. If you get 150, then the Marlins might be a really interesting team this year, a very pesky one at that. The rotation, Jesus Luzardo, really good last year. Struggled on the road. That's the one thing you got to pay attention to is those home road splits. If you play in those, daily transaction leagues, be very careful. See if that trend continues. AJ Puck, Yuri Perez, 2 young pitchers that people have been waiting on for a while, but Perez especially has a lot of upside. The question is the innings, Matt. Can he get that innings total up? Garrett has a lot of potential too, but I think the big X factor is Perez and how much he pitches in 2024.
Yeah, they want to slide Puck into a starter's role, so maybe Sixto Sanchez emerges as the hero in that Marlins bullpen. A lot to watch. Okay, let's move on to the Nationals here. A very plucky team, a wagerer's delight last year. If you were taking Nationals on run lines, especially at home, you were really enjoying. And we have to be aware of trying to find those plus money plays early on in the season. Joe, you and I talk about it offline. We'll start to talk about it online here. In April, it really is a stay away for a lot of things outside of unders in certain ways, and people will lose their shirts in April and go into May dipping into their reserves. And we don't want to do that. The Nationals were a great team that kept a lot of wagerers afloat throughout April and early on into May. It's because of guys like CJ Abrams. It's because of guys like, I think Luis Garcia is a best kept secret in baseball, and I don't want to talk any more about it. The rotation is fun. The bullpen has some questions, which is why you have to wager on this team in a smart way. But overall, what are your thoughts on the Nationals going into the season?
if you think the rotation is fun, I question your idea of fun. I got to tell you, like
Mackenzie
Josiah
Gore is
Gray,
fun.
maybe.
You know, Josiah
I don't
Gray.
know.
Kate
Two
Cavalli will
pitch
come back
pitchers
from
fun.
Tommy John. He had that in March of 23. So yeah, that's fun to me. A few strikeout
We'll
props
see.
here
I think
and
it'll be
there.
a lot more fun if James Wood makes
Sorry.
this roster at some point.
Gosh.
I think
Of
that's what
course.
we're looking for. CJ Abrams, tremendous season last year, tremendous second half, really, I think was what we're looking at. But again, like Nico Horner, I think being a little overvalued in the fantasy market currently because of all the stolen bases, and that's great. But again, what are you sacrificing there? Lane Thomas, one of our favorite late picks last year, absolutely delivered. He is still being undervalued this year, and I don't get it. When you're playing in those deeper outfield leagues, I think Lane Thomas is a guy you absolutely should target hitting towards the top of this order. So Abrams and Thomas at the top is good. Ruiz is interesting. So is Meneses. We'll see how Rosario does if he indeed makes this roster. We expect him to, in which case he might DH, play a little outfield too. Senzel, another interesting piece too. A guy that, once upon a time, one of the best college hitters that you ever saw, and really just struggled to make his mark with the Reds. Maybe a fresh set of circumstances, we'll see. But certainly the East is up for grabs there, or at least second place is up for grabs. We'll come back. The American League East, we return on FST.
I think Boston's going to the NBA Finals, and at this point, I'm still willing to say this early that they're the best team in the NBA, even better, in my view, than the Nuggets.
Largely, for me, I say the front runners would be the Dallas Cowboys and or the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think Jerry might get in on this and say just make it happen and get Saquon on our football team.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Women's basketball, as a coach, as a basketball purist, is so much better to watch than the men. You don't believe me? Sit down, watch it for yourself. Think about the fact that the athleticism is different. So now you have to depend on your fundamental and your skill and not your athleticism.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
The Brooks are treating the Celtics 4 points better at minimum than maybe every single team in the NBA. And so far, I believe they've covered every game since the break.
The Celtics' strict goal here, anything less than a finals appearance and a finals championship is going to be a failure for the Celtics. They got all the pressure in the world across the board here.
Game time decisions, only on SportsGrid. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid, your 24/7 sports wagering network. The early line.
Magical and historic season in Lincoln, Nebraska continues.
He is the best player in the NBA, but also in the biggest moments where the national media is watching.
Newswire.
Something that we have never seen happen before with one of the iconic coaches in the game.
Pharrell Coast to Coast.
The team covers. It's automatic. It's every time. Not sometimes. It's every time.
Game time decisions.
Luka is actually far more dangerous from 3 on the road this year than at home.
This game here tonight, you may want to consider taking as many points as humanly possible.
In-game live. Prime time.
We got not one, but 2 coaches fired systems in place.
Sports Rage
This
Late
sort of
Night.
has letdown written all over it. It's going to be hard to match the emotion that they played with the other night.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Great.
All right, welcome back in FST Fantasy Sports today. Matt and Joe with you here, giving you what you want. We are previewing everything to get us ready for the MLB season. We're going to make some bank. Okay, we did the NL East quickly, and the conversation still goes on at SportsGrid and at SportsGrid TV. Let's go over to the AL East now and start again with the obvious. The juggernaut, the public team, the New York Yankees. Some things that jump out to me: Aaron Judge and toe maintenance. What does that mean? Other than that, what does this Juan Soto experiment look like? What does this lineup look like if Judge isn't there? How well is Gleyber Torres going to play? What role will Alex Verdugo, if any, play? Beyond that, Joe, the rotation, I'm expecting Carlos Rodon to bounce back, but I want to hear from you.
Yeah, look, the Yankees lineup is intriguing because you see the upside of it, but there's also significant downside. DJ LeMahieu at the top of this order right now is troubling to me. It's a very strange season for him, a very strange couple seasons, really, when you think about it. If you go back to last year, he had a 295 BABIP, but a 243 batting average. He got on base at just a 327 clip. The year before was 357, so a significant drop there. I don't know if DJ LeMahieu sticks at the top of this order. And if he doesn't stick at the top of this order, who then becomes the guy to take over there? It could be a guy like Anthony Volpe, who has speed, who has contact ability, despite the fact that Anthony Volpe hit just 200 last year at times. Yeah. I've seen Anthony Volpe play in person. He is not a 200 hitter.
Right. Okay, I think Anthony Volpe will agree that he's not a 200 hitter as well. Joe, you back?
I am back. This happens when you close tabs too furiously and you get very excited talking about Anthony Volpe. But with Anthony Volpe, that's a player who has speed, who has contact ability. You didn't see it, I think, on the full display last season. But again, having watched this kid play in person is like 20 minutes from my house, as much as I did in the last couple of years, I know what Anthony Volpe is capable of, and I think he's a player that just pressed last year, just pressed way too much. So that's the guy to me. If you think about, last season, he had a 259 BABIP, but just a 209 batting average. That's going to come back around. Even if he hits 240, I think he's got better on-base skills potentially too that he could show you. At Double-A, he was a 348 guy. At High A, he was a 391 on-base guy. So Volpe's that guy to pay attention to. He's going cheap in fantasy drafts. If he ends up at the top of that order by June, I think that could be a really interesting swap. But like we know, Torres, Judge, and Soto are going to be great. The rotation, after Garrett Cole, we don't know. It's Carlos Rodon, who has not looked good so far in the spring. It's Marcus Stroman, who I think is going to be a weird mix for this clubhouse potentially. Nestor Cortez, 2 years ago was revelation. Last year was a hesitation. And Clark Schmidt is still the great unknown. So the Yankees rotation is not, I think, the slam dunk that a lot of other people think it is.
All right, it's going to be fun to watch all the money pour in, and we'll be right on the right side of those wagers. All right, moving on, the Baltimore Orioles are amongst, I'd say, three off the top of my head teams where you can just close your eyes and point to a player in the lineup and you'll find a way to make money with them in some regard, season-long DFS or just straight-up wagering. I'm going to let you take it away because there's just so much to talk about. One thing I will point out is I want a healthy Cedric Mullins, and I also don't want to sleep on some of the guys. And if you look at just their starting lineup, you don't see, say, a Jorge Mateo in here. Don't sleep on something like that because things change quickly, and a guy like Mateo can steal you 30 bases in your sleep. He's a free square. He's a waiver wire pickup. So back to our original Nico Horner reaching conversation. 30 steals, I'm going to reach for it. Stolen bases in a year have become a huge, much different commodity. But, Joe, I don't want to take time away from the O's and your thoughts. Go.
Oh, look, Cedric Mullins is a player that if he does bounce back, this could be huge for this batting order. If he doesn't, you have to be concerned that they're going to start to replace him because there are so many guys coming through this pipeline. I know Heston Kjerstad hasn't had the best spring, but that's a player to keep an eye on. Ryan Mountcastle in the middle of this order is still a very good utility bat later on. Santander, good power guy. Rutschman, the best catcher, in fantasy. And then on top of that, you got Gunnar Henderson coming off a Rookie of the Year campaign. Jackson Holliday is the one to circle, folks, because that's a guy that could move up this order. He is going to be the everyday second baseman, in my opinion. He's going to open that time. He's a guy that's going to hit a ton of doubles. If you're giving like a statistical profile, think like peak Craig Biggio. To me, that's what Jackson Holliday is going to be. It reminds me a lot of him, just from the opposite side of the plate. So to me, that's the kind of hitter he is. Power will develop, I think, as time goes on with Holliday, but I wouldn't look for 25 home runs out of the gate for him, but he is going to be a special player. And then the rotation there, Corbin Burns at the top is very important because after Burns, you have question marks. I love Grayson Rodriguez, but there's still a lot of questions about him. because he didn't do it over 170 innings. He did struggle at the beginning of last year, got sent down, got the ship right, came back and was tremendous. Now he needs to be the number 2 because Kyle Bradish doesn't look like he is going to be pitching this rotation anytime soon. Dean Kremer, Tyler Wells, Cole Irvin, like there's some names here that you're looking at. We're waiting for John Means news too, to see if and when he is going to be available. So the Orioles are a little top heavy in this rotation, but then again, so are the Yankees. So if you're the Orioles, I think you're going to rely on the depth of that batting order and make adjustments and moves as you need to as the season goes on.
I liked Cole Irvin during his time with Oakland, and I do think, again, I'm always looking for these nobody's watching kind of guys, because those are the guys upon which we can wager, especially when they're going on a 5th day and nobody's looking at them. Hey, who's that? When you hear them say, hey, who's that? That's the guy you want to look into. All right, let's look in a little bit deeper to the Tampa Rays, because each and every season, everyone seems to forget these Rays. And a name that I don't think is going to be on a lot of lists as far as starting lineups, Ahmed Rosario. But keep an eye on Ahmed Rosario signed to this team. They're going to try to replace Wander Franco, replace him in memory, in speech, and in statistics. And that, for me, is going to be where the problem lies. The pitching staff is something that I believe is always going to be a strength of this organization. Joe often talks about these reclamation projects. I think a guy like Aaron Savale on the pitching staff is one of these types of players. Also a guy like Ryan Pipio, a guy that came over in deal from Los Angeles. These are the names where people go, who? Huh? What? These small market teams that can dominate can truly win us some bank, especially on wagering days, when we look at props, when we look at the individual game within the game. And that's why I love Joe's analysis, especially when he talks about pitching in the black book. You know, this season, I can tell you, I'll talk out of turn, Joe single-handedly personally wrote each and every profile for the pitchers. So when he mentions a guy like Savali, he says, hey, what do you think of PPO off camera, off show? Don't you think I write that down? And with that said, Joe is back. Joe, I was talking about you, and I was saying all the wonderful things. We were talking about these Tampa Rays and Ahmed Rosario, but I was talking about how the pitching will always drive this team. Thoughts?
It does, and it will again. Zach Eflin was a guy last year we talked about. Always pay attention to who the Rays target in the offseason, right? And bring in Zach Eflin, a pitcher that everybody thought had a lot of potential, and then we saw that potential realized. And I think the same thing can be said when you're talking potentially this year about Aaron Savali, a pitcher that's been, around for a while in the Cleveland organization, had some moments, but have we gotten the best out of him? No. Taj Bradley's another guy too. Live fastball that sits around 96. Taj Bradley was rushed last year to the big leagues, I think, and people don't realize that. I think that really hindered his development a little bit. He was a little out of his element, and he struggled with confidence. And I think this year he is more prepared. You're seeing it early in spring. The question with him and Pepio is going to be, does somebody get bounced from this rotation eventually when Jeffrey Springs comes back later on? When you see some of the guys returning from injury, they had so many injuries last season in that Rays rotation. Does that change the calculus for these guys? Maybe, perhaps, but the batting order, again, is going to be just fine. Arozarena, still a top-notch guy in the middle there. Josh Lowe, a tremendous young player, and when Junior Caminero plays, and he is going to play sooner than later, Caminero is going to be that guy that you're going to want to draft now, stash now, and I think by Memorial Day, you're going to be very glad that you did. But the Rays, once again, are going to be right in the thick of things. Are they going to be as good as they were last year? That's a question we have to ask ourselves, but I think they're going to be very dangerous, especially in the second half, when they get more pitchers back and when also Caminero is a full-time player.
So here's the Caminero issue into which I ran recently. I drafted early in just a basic Yahoo League, whatever it was. And here's the thing. If you don't have an NA spot, then you're going to have to take up a roster spot if he's down and waiting and Caballero gets those reps. So be prepared to do that if you truly want to be a part of this. All right, moving on to the Blue Jays. I expect a bounce back for Vlad Guerrero, but then I do read there are some issues. I believe there's a finger issue, and I'm hopeful that's nothing. Dalton Varsho is another guy on the Blue Jays that I keep my eye on. He loses his catcher eligibility, but still remains a fun player. And the rotation, Joe, you and I spent quite a bit of time last week just talking about Kevin Gausman. He says he should be ready to go opening day. There was some concerns with the shoulder. I think Chris Bassett is a huge linchpin to this rotation. And you were mentioning to me that you think the bottom of this rotation is going to lose a name and is going to need some help.
Yeah, Alek Manoah already dealing with a shoulder issue, and we all know what a unmitigated disaster 2023 was for Manoah. But if they lose Gossman for any stretch of time, you can forget the Blue Jays. They don't have enough here. Ricky Tiedemann aside, who is an exciting young pitcher, he's also dealing with some injury issues this spring. Without Gossman, this rotation just does not work. And I'm with you. I think Vladimir Guerrero Jr. has come into camp in much better shape. I think he understands what went wrong last year. And he was hurt a lot last year. He was dealing with injuries. He came out and said, look, I was not healthy the entire season. It was one injury after another, and he played through them. But again, you look at this team and you look at this lineup, Bichette, Guerrero, Springer at the top. After that, it's a lot of uncertainty. I think missing out on the Shohei Ohtani sweepstakes and then not really pivoting off of that hurt this team. The Blue Jays were out there being aggressive in the market, but unfortunately they did not come away with, I think, that other bat that they desperately needed in this batting order. And no offense to Justin Turner, he is a Band-Aid on that situation at best. So the Blue Jays have a lot of work to do, I think, and this is a really tough division to have to look up at.
All right, let's continue on previewing the American League East here on Fantasy Sports Today with Matt Striker and Joe Pisapia. We turn our attention to the Boston Red Sox, and can I be perhaps the first to say that I like this team. I think that they could be plucky. I think they could be fun. Depending on which rookies break camp, we could be looking at a really good defensive outfield. Overall, I just think that they are going to be fun when everyone's going to be pouring their money into the top of this division in the Yankees. I think a team like the Red Sox are going to be interesting. Joe, I want to hear from you.
Yeah, I think they really could be. Jarren Duran, Devers, Costas, those are all names I think everybody should be looking for in fantasy. Yoshida also coming at a really good value potentially. It's Trevor's Story that I still struggle with. I didn't like the signing at the time. I don't know how you let Mookie Betts walk or trade him, I should say, and then Xander Bogaerts goes away and you end up wasting all that money on Trevor's Story. I just don't get that. So to me, that was always very puzzling. You need him to bounce back and be great in this lineup, and I just don't know if he can. When he wasn't in Colorado, he was not a great player. So we'll see how that goes. The rotation already took a hit. Lucas Giolito, most likely going to miss all the season. So now you look to Pivetta, to Crawford, to Bayo, all guys that are going to be really intriguing. And Garrett Whitlock's going to get another crack in this rotation too because of that Giolito injury. I think it's the rotation that is most intriguing to me because most of these guys are very cheap. And if the offense is at least just middle of the road and these pitchers give you some quality starts, there are going to be some competitive games here for the Boston Red Sox in this short term, as you were saying, DFS side, wagering side on a daily basis. This is the team that can sneak up on you. Carter Crawford, Garrett Whitlock, Pivetta all have a lot of potential. And then you're also looking at a guy, Bayo, who the Red Sox are already trying to lock up to a long-term deal. So don't sleep on this Red Sox rotation because in fantasy, I think they're coming at a tremendous value. And right now, with Lucas Giolito out, probably going to make 25 to 30 starts. All of them have that pathway. So we'll see if the Red Sox can compete and get back into anything in the thick of the top of this division in the American League East. When we come back, the stat of the day right here on FST.
Boston's going to the NBA Finals, and at this point, I'm still willing to say this early that they're the best team in the NBA, even better, in my view, than the Nuggets.
Barkley, for me, I say the front runners would be the Dallas Cowboys and or the Philadelphia Eagles, and I think Jerry might get in on this and say just make it happen and get Saquon on our football team.
Pharrell Coast to Coast, only on SportsGrid.
Women's basketball, as a coach, as a basketball purist, is so much better to watch than the men. You don't believe me? Sit down, watch it for yourself. Think about the fact that the athleticism is different. So now you have to depend on your fundamental and your skill and not your athleticism.
Betting above the rim, only on SportsGrid.
The Brooks are treating the Celtics 4 points better at minimum than maybe every single team in the NBA. And so far, I believe they've covered every game since the break.
The Celtics' strict goal here, anything less than a finals appearance and a finals championship is going to be a failure for the Celtics. They got all the pressure in the world across the board here.
Game time decisions only on SportsGrid. It's smarter to be on SportsGrid, your 24/7 sports wagering network. The early line.
Magical and historic season in Lincoln, Nebraska continues.
He is the best player in the NBA, but also in the biggest moments where the national media is watching.
Newswire.
Something that we have never seen happen before with one of the iconic coaches in the game.
Pharrell coast to coast.
The team covers. It's automatic. It's every time. Not sometimes. It's every time.
Game time decisions.
Luka is actually far more dangerous from 3 on the road this year than at home.
This game here tonight, you may want to consider taking as many points as humanly possible.
In-game live. Prime time.
We got not one, but 2 coaches fired systems in place.
Sports Rage
This
late
sort
night.
of has letdown written all over it. It's going to be hard to match the emotion that they played with the other night.
It's smarter to be on SportsGrid.
Break.
All right, welcome back in. This is FST, Fantasy Sports Today. Matt and Joe with you here, giving you everything you need to dominate the upcoming MLB season, whether it be season-long fantasy, DFS, wagering, everything you need, we've got you covered. And it's all about the numbers here. And Joe, we have a wild stat of the day, and you and I can pound sand, I suppose, over the amount of money that organizations can spend and what is the expected return where you can sit back and say, yes, I spent as much as the GDP of a small struggling nation. What is it that I can get in return? And I joked around with you. Do I sweep the season, sweep the playoffs, sweep the World Series, all of my players break all of the records and all of my merchandise hangs from the streets of every single major city in the world? Will that be worth the investment? Because this stat of the day is sobering.
It's sobering indeed. It is the amount of money that the Dodgers spend to everybody else in the league. So this past offseason, the Dodgers, of course, were first in spending. They spent over $1.087 billion. It sounds like something Dr. Evil would be asking for. The number 2 team behind the Dodgers was actually the Giants, spending $261 million this offseason. Okay, well, pretty good, right? But it's a significant drop. I mean, we're talking about 5 times difference. The 30th team, the last team, the least amount of money spent, the Colorado Rockies, $3.5 million. $3.5 million compared to over $1 billion spent this offseason. It's a huge gap in Major League Baseball. And if Major League Baseball is talking about expanding that, this is a big problem because you can't have teams spending $1 billion in an offseason and a team spending $3 million in an offseason. It just does not work for a competitive balance factor. And I know teams are in different situations and different rebuild parts of their organization, but you mentioned about what the Dodgers have to do. For $1 billion, you better win multiple championships. This is not just even one. I think for that investment, you've got to be there and you've got to be winning multiple championships. We'll see if the Dodgers can get one more
Dodgers
in 2024. We'll be right back. Hour 2 starts right now with FS.